Welcome to our Animal Justice Academy Lunchtime Live. I'm Kimberly Carroll. I am the Director of Animal Justice Academy, and our topic today, struck down, Ontario's Ag-Gag law defeat unpacked. And we have with us Camille Labchuk and Jessica Scott-Reid. So as most of you know, something pretty spectacular happened on April 2nd. A landmark win against Ag-Gag legislation in Canada. Our animal justice lawyers got major provisions of Ontario's Ag-Gag law, formerly Bill 156, struck down. And we're going to talk all about how that happened and what it means in the next hour. We have Animal Justice's fearless leader, our executive director, Camille Labchuk, joining us. Hello, Camille.
Hello, Kimberly. Hello, Jess. Hi, everybody else. And so awesome to see all your faces.
And we also have Jessica Scott-Reid, one of our favorite journalists in the world. Jessica, welcome.
Thank you so much. That's very kind of you. Hi, all.
All right. Well, they've all got your bios, and I really want to jump in and get in this. So I'm just going to, start off. Jessica, what just happened? April 2nd, what would be your headline? Give it to us.
Good question. Well, in fact, you'll have to wait for that headline because there is a story coming out in, I don't want to say which paper, a national paper here in Canada in the coming days. So I'm not going to give away the headline because there's one coming. So watch for that.
Okay. Well, so Jess's headline so far is just big news.
That's right. There you go. Right. Big news coming. That's the headline.
Well, Camille, there are a couple of big firsts here with this win. So tell us a little bit about this big win. Tell us why it's a big deal.
Absolutely. So Ontario wasn't the first province to pass an Ag-Gag law. That was Alberta with the distinct honor, but it was the second. And this lawsuit that Animal Justice, Jessica Scott-Reid, and Louise Jorgensen filed was the first to challenge an Ag-Gag law. And thanks to this amazing result that we got on April 2nd, it is the first case to strike down an Ag-Gag law as well in Canada, and sets just a tremendous precedent for the future of Ag-Gag litigation, because we at Animal Justice, and I know others like Jessica as well, will not rest until all Ag-Gag laws are either struck down or repealed, so we can protect the important voices that we have in sharing the stories of animals who are abused on farms.
I just want everybody to take this in.
I
need everybody to take this in, because in this arena, we don't get a lot of big victories, but this was really big. And it's been so long in the making. And so, Camille, for anyone that's been living in a cave the last few years, and that's not meant to be an insult, a cave sounds awfully good right now, considering the political environment out there. Can you give us an idea of the course of events that this court case grew out of? Can you give us a little, thumbnail sketch of the history?
Yeah, let's go back a little bit to the first inklings of Ag-Gag laws in Ontario. A number of us from Animal Justice were on the way to Halifax for the very first Canadian Animal Law Conference in 2019.
Yes, I remember that.
Yeah. And saw a news release from the province of Alberta. Actually, it was a news conference that Premier at the time, Jason Kenney, held with a bunch of farmers. It's farmers who had just been the subject, their farm, their so-called free-range turkey farm, was the subject of a sit-in by some animal advocates who wanted to expose the conditions on the farm, which they said were pretty troubling. And in response, Jason Kenney announced the first enhanced trespass or Ag-Gag law that Canada had ever seen. And we all said to ourselves, okay, here we go. It's time to gear up. This is going to be the next fight that we as a community in Canada have to undertake.
And I remember that, Camille. We were in a cab, literally listening on the radio, and it was just like this doom sort of came over us, and we're like, oh shit, here we go. Yeah.
That was the moment, Kimberly. And, at the time, we maybe naively thought that Canada probably wouldn't be hit with the Ag-Gag laws for two reasons. The first is that the industry at one point said that it wasn't a fan of Ag-Gag laws. In 2013, there was an article in the Ontario Farmer publication saying that they favor transparency over Ag-Gag laws that were in the US that have a very long history in that country. So we thought perhaps that we'd escape this. And Ag-Gag laws in the US, they kind of came and went in the 2010s. Most states are no longer looking to pass them. There's a few outliers like Iowa, which is a very farming-centric state, but for the most part, they were kind of done. So we thought we'd escape this. And in that moment on the taxi ride, we realized that we had not. It didn't take long before Doug Ford's government announced an intention to introduce an Ag-Gag law as well. The Alberta law passed in only 10 days with almost no public debate. They refused to let us be a witness or comment publicly in the legislature about the law. But the Ontario law took a bit longer. It was introduced in December of 2019 and then moved through the process. Of course, everyone knows the pandemic hit just a few months later, and we thought, well, this is good news. Perhaps they won't move forward with it because they should be concerned about COVID and protecting people's health. Somehow, the Doug Ford government decided that protecting the farm industry by passing ag laws was also a priority, and they rammed it through in June 2020, just a couple months after COVID hit, when we were all still in lockdown. And it's still stunning to this day to think that that was a priority. And I'm looking around the audience here, and I'm seeing so many faces of folks who were participating in that process, who sent committee letters in, who lobbied their MPPs, who advocated publicly, who donated to help us fight this law. I'm very grateful for all of you. But unfortunately, the law was rammed through. And most of it came into effect in December 2020, so about a year after it was first proposed. Animal Justice did the last legal undercover investigation in the province of Ontario just days before it passed, before it came into effect. And that investigation was of a pig farm called Paragon. It aired on CTV's W5 and just revealed appalling practices. And that was, I think, one of the major focal points for the public and the media to understand this phenomenon of Ag-Gag laws, because CTV's piece focused on this new threat. So once it passed, we knew that we knew from the moment it was proposed that we had to challenge Ag-Gag laws in court. Our American friends have been enormously successful in striking down virtually every Ag-Gag law in whole or in part that was proposed down there. And they did that under their free speech provisions under their constitution. We have freedom of expression, which is a very similar right. And we immediately filed a lawsuit just months after it came into effect, just about 2 months, and set about fighting it for, the past 3 years. So it was, an enormous amount of work, thousands and thousands of pages of evidence, affidavits from, I think, 26 people in the case. That means that the lawyers involved in the case had to cross-examine each and every one of those people. I was one of those people. My cross-examination took 2 days. Jessica was one of them as well. I hope yours wasn't quite so long, but I can't remember. And it culminated in the court case, the actual 3-day hearing that was taking place late October of last year. And then we waited for the judgment. And I always had a feeling it was going to come out the first half of April. I just had this idea in my mind that would be it. And pretty much bang on, April 2nd, we got the news that we won. So I'm sure we'll get into more of the details, but that's the history.
Wow. Well, and so can we just talk about what this law that is currently in place right now, and about at least parts of it are about to be repealed. Can you tell us, Camille, what the pieces are that were most troubling?
Yeah, so there are, I would say, 2 main pieces that are troubling and a bunch of little side pieces. So I'll focus on the main pieces and I'll mention the other ones. The first was a ban on undercover investigations into a farm or a slaughterhouse. And just so everyone is on the same page, I think most people at this point are pretty aware of undercover investigations and their importance as a tool to expose animal suffering to the public behind closed doors. But how they work is someone would seek a job on a farm or the slaughterhouse, a person who's perhaps affiliated with an animal advocacy group like Animal Justice. They would not disclose to the farm or slaughterhouse, of course, that they intend to investigate the farm. They would deny any affiliation with an animal protection group. They may have a resume that leaves off, say, a university degree, which could be a red flag for an employer hiring somebody for a low-level manual labor position on the farm. So there would be some misrepresentation involved to get that position. What Ontario's Ag-Gag law does is it says that you cannot get permission to be on a farm or slaughterhouse using a false pretense. And that effectively outlaws and could punish people who seek positions without disclosing their full intentions. It could
because
also,
Camille, one thing that people should note, I think, is because it is par for the course now for the ag industry to ask if you have any affiliation with an animal group, right?
very, very common. Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. That's right. Yes. And One other group of people that this could affect is people who maybe didn't go get a job intending to be a whistleblower, but were already working somewhere and then saw really troubling material that they wanted to report and wanted to expose publicly. They could have signed an agreement that could prohibit them from doing that in various ways that could interact with this false pretenses provision. And that's especially the case with marginalized workers like temporary foreign workers or farm workers who maybe don't have status in the country. So very, very troubling. That's number one. Number two is it restricted the activities of people involved in bearing witness outside slaughterhouses to trucks bringing animals in for slaughter. And I'm sure a lot of you have probably participated in those visuals, perhaps through the Animal Save movement, which was founded here in Ontario. And you've seen how powerful an experience that can be, or maybe you've seen those images online. But people will typically wait until a truck is about to turn into a slaughterhouse. They will approach the side of the truck, and we all know that those trucks carrying animals to their death are open-sided, no climate control, no protections for the animals from heat or cold, so you can see inside them. And you can film inside them as well. And sometimes people will interact with the animals, but if they come up to the windows, or sometimes people will film them, of course, and also provide water to them on occasion. And we know that Anita Crines, good friend of many of us, was prosecuted for criminal mischief for giving water to thirsty, suffering pigs on a very hot day. So the intention of the industry was to stop people from engaging in that type of activism and for telling the stories and filing reports about the cruelty they see inside those trucks. So the second piece that was most troubling to us restricted people from interacting or interfering with animals in trucks, including having any contact with them. And we said that was also against the charter. And there's some incidental issues, like some technical legal things. One of the troubling provisions was that the regime set up a warrantless arrest system. It also allowed farmers to privately prosecute animal advocates who they could privately arrest as well, and get cost recovery from them, which is pretty much unheard of in Canadian law. So it was a very exceptional regime designed clearly by the agriculture industry.
So Jessica, as a journalist, what did you think? What did you feel when you found out that Ontario was basically outlawing whistleblowers and undercover investigators in animal agriculture?
I mean, to back up for one step, I remember the Alberta one first too, which was so knee-jerk and so upsetting. And of course, I turned to Camille and asked, what does this really mean? Because to me, this was somewhat new. Like we'd heard about it in the US, but they, like you'd said, come and gone. I didn't really know what it was going to mean. And I remember writing an article for the Globe and Mail saying something about Alberta beef. What have you got to hide? I thought you were so proud of your product. And then when it moved into Ontario, that's when I really became worried, because so much of my work, and I've written this exactly for the Toronto Star in the past, so much of my work, so many stories I've written in the last several years have depended on undercover investigators, activists, whistleblowers being in those spaces and gathering that evidence. And it was very scary for me to think that not only my job was in jeopardy, but my ability to tell these stories for animals, which is, my purpose as well. So I was very troubled and very scared for the future of my job and the future of farming in Canada.
And and as just as a journalist, I mean, it's so Big Brother like, right? And had you seen that in any that seemed really new to our society, to our our laws.
It was shocking for Canada to imagine, a place where we think we're so free, and especially me as a journalist, my ability to tell these stories in the media. I'm always, I always kind of joke that I'm surprised that they let me write the things that I do. But over time, you become more used to it. And you realize you have a right to be there. These stories have a right to be told. And the animals deserve a voice in the media, just like any vulnerable population. And advocates deserve to be that voice for them. And that's sort of a role that I feel I play as a journalist and an advocate. And to think that there was going to be legislation that quelled my ability to do that seemed very un-Canadian, very draconian, and very scary.
Mm-hmm. Camille, along with animal justice, our applicants were Jessica and Louise Jorgensen from Toronto Cow Safe. So tell us a little bit about how this all came together and sort of the strategy and approach of this case.
Absolutely. So we wanted to have a variety of plaintiffs who could provide evidence about how the law affected them in terms of their own individual experience and how it interfered with their protected charter rights and which violated their constitutional protections. So at Animal Justice, we directly engage in undercover investigations. And so for us, that was a no-brainer. This directly affected our work, and it would limit us from exposing horrific cruelty and using exposés as a tool. Now, just for context about the importance of these exposés, the last one I mentioned that we did before it became illegal to do so was at Paragon Pig Farms. And it took some time for this case to work its way through the court, but just a little under a year ago, that company pleaded guilty to multiple provincial offenses as a result of our investigation for, and I'll just share a couple graphic details, cutting the tails and testes off of piglets without analgesics with no pain relief, and an illegal C-section on a pregnant mother pig that our investigator witnessed on their first day on the job, where she was sliced open, her piglets were removed, and what the industry calls a slash and grab. She was too sick to continue, but they thought they could save the piglets and send them into meat production if they cut her open. She was still alive when she was cut open and sensible to pain is what the experts concluded. This is what's at stake. So for us, that's the type of evidence that we were able to bring into the case. Jessica brought something different. She's a journalist who relies almost exclusively on whistleblower reports to talk about the conditions inside farms. Unfortunately, farms are some of the least transparent locations that we have on the planet. They're private property. The public is barred from entering them. They've set up a lot of biosecurity rules to justify that barring of entry. And your average consumer has no possible way of directly inspecting the conditions of the animals that they eat. The only way that they have of receiving that information is through investigative reports that people like Jessica might put out. And her success in getting those issues into the pages of the Globe and Mail and the Toronto Star and many other publications is really, really paramount. So Jessica brought the perspective of a journalist whose rights would be violated by this restriction. And then Louise brought her perspective as somebody who engaged in activism outside slaughterhouses. Louise is a longtime fantastic activist with the Save movement, and in particular organizes Toronto Cow Save vigils outside a cow slaughterhouse in the city of Toronto. And she and others photographed those animals inside trucks and have brought those stories to the public. And she was able to speak about the very important, very personal experience of bearing witness and what that means to her and to other activists and how this bill interferes with that right. And so that's how we went about constructing the applicants. And we had evidence from animal welfare experts as well and the journalism expert to talk about what this meant for undercover journalism.
Mm. Well, and also, so before I ask more, Jessica, you as an applicant, as a plaintiff, was this a hard decision to make to get involved in this? Was it a nerve-wracking thing to do? What inspired you to do it?
It seemed like a no-brainer. It seemed like something that needed to be done, and there was no way I wasn't going to do it. On top of what Camille just used as examples, something I also talked about during the case and throughout is that not only does the public not be able to see these spaces because they're so often hidden behind closed doors or for brief moments in a slaughter truck, but consumers are also being persuaded of other things with marketing and messaging from the industry. So it feels very much like my responsibility to expose the truth of these things, right? That's what journalism is supposed to be for. And it really felt like this legislation was working in tandem with that misleading marketing and advertising. And it felt even more like my responsibility to help expose the truth of these spaces and these practices, as well as those efforts to dissuade people in another way. So it felt like an absolute necessity to join in. And I was glad to be asked.
Thank you. You've got chutzpah, lady. I love it. Camille, we also had what are called interveners in the case. Can you speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, so interveners in a court case are external parties who are allowed to participate in a bit of a limited way to provide their perspective and often legal arguments on the issues at stake. So in this case, we were lucky to have three really strong interveners. We had the Animal Alliance of Canada, which spoke about extensive lobbying by the agriculture industry and some of the arguments around the case. We had the Centre for Free Expression at Toronto Metropolitan University. their focus is ensuring that journalists and others do have free expression rights. And they spoke about the importance of whistleblowing and theoretical concepts around whistleblowing from academic literature. So the importance for whistleblowers of being able to decide when and where they blow the whistle and of not facing repercussions for doing that. One thing, I haven't gotten into a lot of the intricacies of this law, but there were many beyond what I've just shared. And one of the intricacies was some sort of exceptions the government tried to carve out to make it less unconstitutional, so we wouldn't be able to challenge it for some journalists and for some whistleblowers. And they spoke about why those exceptions were baloney and didn't actually advance anything at all. And then finally, we had the Regan Russell Foundation. So I know many of you on this call know Regan Russell or knew Regan Russell, but she is a longtime animal advocate who was from Hamilton, who was tragically run over and killed by a pig slaughterhouse, pig slaughter truck at Fearman's Pork Slaughterhouse in Burlington, Ontario, just days after the law passed. And Regan's family wanted to make the point that it would not be appropriate for the government to use her death as justification for this law. That protesters, when they're, engaged in the activism that's so important to them, should be able to take reasonable risks. And that's what she did. Unfortunately, she was killed. I strongly encourage you to read the investigative report in the Toronto Star about the circumstances surrounding her death, because I think that makes it clear that it wasn't Regan taking a risk. It was problematic behavior by the truck driver and others. So those are the interveners, and they really brought a lot of flavor and color to the case, and we were so glad to have them.
So let's get into more of how did the court case go. So, basically this, our little David going up against, of animal justice, going up against the Goliath of, the country's biggest government. And this was a huge undertaking for our team. Tell us, give us a little debrief of how you felt like the case actually went as it went.
Yeah, well, I want to just start this off by acknowledging that this was such a collaborative team effort. We had not only the amazing lawyers from our team on the case, we had Caitlin Mitchell and Scott Tinney, and I played a bit of a role, but less than them. We had Andrea Gonsalves and Frederick Schumann from Stockwoods, which is a very well-regarded law firm in Toronto. And we had Arden Beddoes, who has done so many of animal justice's cases with us and is one of the best animal lawyers in the country. And of course, we had many external volunteers. I think I saw Kathy Pike on this call, but Kathy played a huge role, and many others, including law students who helped us for the summer. And I also really want to acknowledge the people who helped us fund this case. This was not a cheap case. This was the most expensive case that we've ever undertaken. And we're very fortunate that we had very good rates from our external counsel. They were passionate about this as well and made it workable for us. But I know there are people on this call who helped us afford that by donating, including some friends from Dr. Bronner's. I think I saw Af and Lilia, maybe some others as well. But this case would not have happened without them. So we set about the process of, filing everything, and we finally got into court at the end of October last year. And I would say the court case went really well. We thought that we made the points that we needed to, and we thought that the judge listened to us. I would say one of the highlights for me of that 3 days was the moment that we played an undercover investigation video from Paragon Farms, that place I keep mentioning. It was a video that we produced showing what happened on that particular farm, which is a horror story, as you can imagine. And it was narrated by Jan Arden. And I think it was really a powerful moment for the judge to see that video and witness with his own eyes what animals endure and why we feel it's important that the public gets to see that. So I was really pleased with how the case went. In law, you always think that you're going to win and you always hope that you're going to win. And sometimes you're wrong, even though you should be right. So we did not know which way the case was going to go. In the end, it went roughly as I had expected it. So just to explain, am I jumping ahead, Kimberly?
No, but you know what, while we're on the video topic, Camille, Debbie was commenting, so many cases, video evidence gets suppressed. So what was different about this?
Well, I think what was seen on video was directly relevant. So we spent quite a lot of time compiling our evidence in this case and making sure that it was the strongest record possible. There's another saying in law that bad facts make bad law. And if you don't present your evidence in a compelling way and you don't have the right information before the court, they can't necessarily rule the way that you want them to. So we wanted to make it clear the structural challenges with challenging animal agriculture, that this is a privately policed industry where the industry makes up its own rules. The centralization of farming, so fewer farms and bigger farms was something that the judge really drew out in his decision. And we spent a lot of time going through the evidence of what undercover investigations on farms have revealed. There have been well over a dozen investigations into farms in Canada, and we put all of those into evidence so that the judge had an understanding of how this strategy had really paid off. So not only the cruelty that was revealed, but the legal action that was taken as a result. There have been many charges and many guilty pleas of farms for this type of conduct. In fact, typically the only way a farm ever gets charged and prosecuted for animal cruelty is through an undercover investigation. And we tried to make that really, really clear. And so the evidence was directly relevant to the points that we wanted to make. And there was no dispute that it should be allowed into the case.
Excellent. Can either of you or both of you speak a little bit more about this thing called freedom of expression? We all are sort of have a deluge of, freedom of speech from the US, but what is freedom of expression and how did this work in terms of our case?
You take that one, Camille.
I can start with the technical legal definition, and if you want to fill it out, you're welcome to. So free expression encompasses our ability to participate in democratic discourse in society in a variety of different ways. That could mean the words that you speak. That could mean artistic expression. It could mean journalistic expression. Under that section of the charter that covers free expression, it includes freedom of thought, expression, opinion, and belief. So it's a really broad provision designed to make sure that there is that ability for people to have democratic discourse and promote in truth-promoting function by sharing their truths with the world. I'll say just a couple of interesting things about the right of free expression. The first is it protects not just the right of the speaker, so somebody who wants to share information, it also protects the right of the listener. And
that's a really big piece, Camille. I think that's the big piece that people have to really take in here.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really important that people be able to hear what others want to say without government interference to suppress them. So when we talk about this right, it refers to everyone's ability to express themselves free from government interference. So the government cannot regulate your speech. It cannot tell you what to say. It cannot tell you what to think. Now, there's exceptions to this. A right can be interfered with if it's justifiable, and there's a 4-part test essentially under the law to decide whether it's justifiable, which we can get into, but it might be a little bit too technical for this discussion. So that is really important. And I now forget the second point I was going to make about what's interesting about about this, right? But
yeah,
let Jess add to it.
But yeah, so the idea is that it's not just our right to speak as a citizen, it's our right to hear what is important, what actually affects the public interest. Is that right? Yeah.
That's exactly right. And it's been held to be one of the most fundamental and important rights guaranteed to Canadians under the Constitution. I remembered what I was going to say. The interesting thing about free expression, which was super important for this case, is that it doesn't just protect truthful speech, it protects misrepresentations as well. The right to free expression has been held to protect odious, horrific lies about the Holocaust. So you can imagine when that is the case and the law is that broad to encompass that type of odious speech, of course, a minor white lie and misrepresentation about whether someone's an animal rights advocate, whether they're affiliated with an animal protection group, whether they have a university degree, you can see why that type of speech is obviously protected.
Okay, so we went at it. We're in there, freedom of expression. So anything else that you want to tell us about what went down in the court?
Well, Jess had COVID, unfortunately, and so had to miss the big day.
I know.
I was disappointed. But I would say the other part for me that was really gratifying was seeing, I don't know, Kimberly, if you have an estimate of how many people, but probably around 100 people who came to a courthouse rally in support of this important provision, including, a city council member. We had tons of cameras from all the news stations there. It was taken really seriously. And this wasn't planned, but our courthouse happened to have a window facing the street. And so the judge could hear the rally, he could hear people on the megaphone, he could hear people whose passions were being expressed, who disagreed with this law and wanted to see it struck down. And that was, I think, a really important part of the case, is showing public support for it. And of course, the media attention that it received was significant in reminding people that this law exists, is on the books, and that this is what the animal agriculture industry is trying to do. It's trying to hide where their food comes from.
Yeah, the judge actually commented while the rally was going on, and got a report from somebody that was in there while we were doing it. He said something like, "See, this shows the level of public interest there is in the case." We were so worried about, pissing off the judge, but he actually stopped and referred to the sounds of the rally, and brought up, I think near the closing, he made a similar comment about, not about it's obvious by the people in the court and the rally how much interest there is in this issue. So folks, never underestimate the power of a well-positioned protest.
That's right. Even in court cases where you think that judicial officers, they're supposed to be unbiased, they're not really supposed to make their decisions based on a rally or news coverage. But we are all humans, and humans are swayed by what others think. They're swayed by the context in which they live in. They're swayed by the information that they receive in the newspaper. And so never neglect the public facing side of a court case or a legal battle.
Mm-hmm. And Jess, there are some comments. Tana Bray said there would be even more interest if people knew. This has been notoriously hard, Ag-Gag, to get out into the public. It has been a tough thing to get media to cover. Can you tell us a little bit about what that's all about, Jess?
Yeah, it's sort of the golden ticket. We're always trying to figure out how to get things in the media, what things will fly with editors and readers and what won't. It's a constant challenge, yet it's always changing. Camille and I are often speaking about these kinds of ebbs and flows and these waves of being able to get animal issues in general into the media. It all depends on the news cycle. It all depends on the news of the day. I'm not sure what the reason is why Ag-Gag is difficult. I know I had a pretty good success in talking about it because of my involvement in the case. That gave me an extra unique perspective. That's something that editors care more about when you're writing, especially opinion pieces, that not only are you someone who could speak on a subject, but I could speak from within it. So that gave me a really great upper hand and able to cover this issue. But really, in terms of getting animal issues in the media, I don't know what the reason is all the time. I think so much has to do with what's going on in the world, the space that's open in the media. I will often ask editors, if you just need some space to fill, which is unfortunate that that's the space that animals get, is just the space that they might have to fill. Because, every day they have literal space to fill in a newspaper. Often my pieces will go in, I think, when they just have space to fill. But I'll take it, and I'll keep asking for it. And I think that's the ticket, especially when we're talking about even things like letters to the editor. Like AJA is always asked whenever I write an article, or if animal justice is in the media or anything to do with animals, to have those letters to the editor sent in, even if they don't get published, just always keeping editors aware and publications aware that these issues matter to a lot of people, trying to keep the conversation going. That helps to get more interest in these issues in the long run and in the bigger picture. So whatever we can do from the outside to keep editors and publications in the know that these issues matter to a lot of people. It's very much like the rallies outside on the street. We have to let those in authority know that these issues matter, so that they can get more coverage.
And speaking of which, when Jess's article comes out next week in a major paper, we will definitely be putting a push behind letters to the editor. So, anybody this is going to be a national paper, anybody in Canada can write. And again, the big trick is, it's not about whether it gets published, it's the amount of letters, because if there are, 50 letters, there's going to be 5 of those published. If there's only 2 letters, there might not be any published. So it's a really important. So keep your eyes open for that, folks. And also, Kirsten, maybe just if you have a chance, Jess wrote an article about our caviar investigation this just a few days ago in the province out of BC. So if we have any BC folks that are here, we'll have Kirsten drop the article. And if you can do a letter to the editor to support that article, that would be really amazing. Okay, so I digress. Camille, we had to wait months for the ruling, but was it worth the wait? Can you break down the judge's ruling for us? There was both amazing news and there was also some not great news. So give us the whole rundown.
Absolutely. So yeah, we're really enthusiastic and excited about the decision, but it was not a complete victory. We didn't win every argument that we made. We won the big one, which is that the ban on undercover investigations was struck down. But the place where we were not successful, unfortunately, was with regard to save vigils and this idea of interacting with animals on trucks. Now, I want to be clear. I don't want to scare people away who might want to do a vigil at a slaughterhouse. It is not illegal to do a vigil. It's illegal to block a truck, and it's illegal to interact with an animal inside a truck or interfere with them, and to give them water. But it is not illegal to stand on the street and do a vigil. It's not illegal to look inside the truck. Probably mostly fine to put a camera up to the truck if there's no other interference. So just so people are a bit clear on that, and we can talk more about that if there's anybody engaged in vigils, but it doesn't mean the end of vigils. But I will say, of course, a lot of folks are more fearful of doing them than they used to be because of these restrictions.
That's just in Ontario, right, Camille? Just to be clear, for those folks that are in Winnipeg like me, that's different in Winnipeg for our Ag-Gag laws, right? The interaction law there is a little bit more detailed.
Yeah, so there are provisions as well in Manitoba, and it's the same deal. You know, it's not unlawful to do a vigil, but you can't interact or interfere with a truck. Yeah, so you know, be cautious, but don't necessarily stop your activism if that's what really calls you. So unfortunately, we lost on that point, and then there were some other more technical legal arguments that we didn't win on as well around things in the bill or things in the law that enhanced its negative effect, like the private prosecution, the private arrest powers, and this reverse onus where somebody, instead of the state having to prove that they didn't have permission to be on a farm or slaughterhouse, they have to prove that they did have permission, which is typically considered unconstitutional, but sometimes it's acceptable by the courts. So Kimberly, on the big point, undercover exposés, we won, and it was a fairly unqualified win. The judge agreed with essentially all of our arguments. He rejected systematically almost every argument that the province of Ontario made. He said that the law was intended to reduce investigations on farms, intended to interfere with free speech. And not only did it do so in its intention, but its effect bore that out as well. He said that the value of the communication at issue, which is exposing the truth about farmed animal suffering, was very high. And it's an issue that's of interest to at least some members of the public, and that people are entitled to be informed and educated on this topic and decide for themselves if they find conditions on farms to be acceptable. So that was really strong. That was something that we've been pushing for. He said that the way that Ontario had crafted the restrictions, and I won't get too much into the details because it's very complicated and intricate, but they tried to put in these narrow journalistic and whistleblower exceptions. He said that those were not good enough. There was one provision that forced a potential whistleblower, so somebody who already was working on the farm and saw something, or someone who's undercover, to report the cruelty as soon as they see it. So that would mean if you were working at a farm and you saw something, you would have to report that immediately to authorities, blowing your cover and forgoing any chance for reporting or investigating a larger pattern of conduct that could, for instance, link management to this conduct. So that was great. He thought the journalistic exception was far too narrow.
Amazing.
He also rejected a lot of the claims the government made about why this bill was important. He said, first of all, that much of the government's evidence, and this is very, very true, was focused on the risks that trespassers bring onto farms, so potential diseases. And he said that the bill and the undercover investigation provision, that's not about trespass. It has no bearing. An undercover worker is a completely different person than someone who just walks onto a farm without permission, which was great. He also rejected wholeheartedly this idea that an undercover worker was somehow a risk to biosecurity. which was another one of the arguments that the government consistently put forward. They love relying on this idea of biosecurity, which, if you're not familiar with the term, means essentially preventing disease, risk, and contamination to animals. And he said that undercover exposés can actually expose biosecurity threats rather than produce them. So that was important. He also rejected this idea that it was somehow acceptable for government to regulate expression if it might harm a farmer in some way, even economic harm, which was something that the bill did. He said that penalizing truthful statements or videos depicting cruelty because it might harm farmers' economic interests seems to, quote, strike at the very heart of freedom of expression. And that was
that's powerful.
And just to add just a couple more tiny points that were not central to the ruling, but that I found really important. The government tried to use the slippery slope argument, which is something as we all as animal advocates hear all the time. Oh, you're coming for this now, but what are you coming for next? He rejected, the judge, the idea that the long-term goals of the applicants or some people involved in the case have any bearing on this issue. Whether people want a vegan world or animal liberation, irrelevant to the restrictions on undercover exposés. That was great.
Wow.
And then I think some of the most powerful parts for me was where he took readers through an example of piglet thumping. Piglet thumping, if you don't already know, is a way that's accepted by the industry of killing baby pigs. And it involves slamming them head first against concrete, a floor or a wall. It's supposed to kill them, doesn't always work in practice. Really awful thing that is sometimes witnessed. And he described that process. And he said for him, at the end of the day, he was not even sure, after all the evidence in the case, as a judge who'd sat on this case for 3 days, he didn't know if that was lawful or not, because there's so much confusion over standard practices on farms and what's legal and what's not. And that was vindication of everything that we've been saying for years, which is that they're unregulated entities where there's mass confusion, and even lawyers, even judges, don't know what's acceptable.
Wow. And so this would be considered a strong ruling by the judge. Is that right, Camille?
I think so. I think that we won on virtually every point regarding undercover investigations and couldn't be much happier with that part.
Jessica, what was your reaction to the ruling?
I mean, at first I had to wait to talk to Camille and to figure out what it all meant.
What does this actually mean? Yeah.
I remember her saying we need some time to digest it first. And I said, okay, you digest, I'll wait. Because I always need her interpretation, the legal experts. I was cautiously excited because I didn't know what to expect. I feel like we lose more often than we win, at least in my space. So the fact that there was any indication that we had won anything, I was so happy, but I was cautiously waiting. And then once I got more details and more explanation, I was thrilled, not only for us in our case, and for the precedent that it sets, and for the possible future of taking on Ag-Gag laws in Canada elsewhere. I was happy for my job, and I was happy for the animals that would be able to have someone there to witness, possibly in the future again in Ontario, the suffering that they endure, and that I would be able to once again tell those stories, and not rely on investigations from 2008 or something, as was brought up in the case, that, oh yeah, it's happened before, so you've already seen it, so now you know, so you don't need any more. That's not how it works. That's not how news works. So yeah, eventually I was thrilled, and I'm ready to get back to work as soon as there's a story to tell.
Thank you, Jess. We so appreciate you telling those stories, and it's such a beautiful, deep-hearted way. Camille, that word precedence, tell us what that means and what this case might be in terms of precedence.
Right. Well, it's a strong statement in favor of free expression, in favor of transparency in the industry, and in favor of this idea that customers deserve to know what they're buying. We hope it will be influential in Alberta. As I mentioned, we won't rest until all Ag-Gag laws are struck down or repealed, and we are actively working on that. I think it's, as many of you know, there's a federal Ag-Gag law that has been proposed and is working its way through the Senate. We've certainly made sure that we've alerted them to this decision. The federal Ag-Gag law is a little bit different. It does actually focus on trespass rather than some of the issues seen in this law. But I think it is the first judicial pronouncement about an ag-gag law in Canada. And there is this idea of momentum, right? When you have a win under your belt and people's opinions start to shift or they become more aware of these issues, to me, that's a really important part of the flow of this campaign, and the trajectory that we're on is having this momentum and having this first win.
Okay, so give us the timeline. People are asking, Leslie Fox, hi Leslie, asked, will there be an appeal? The law is still in place right now, so nobody go charging. But so give us a little bit of an idea of the timeline of what happens next.
Yeah, so a few technical details. Number one is that the government asked at the conclusion of the hearing that if the judge was going to strike down the law, that they'd be allowed to come back into court and make arguments at that point about when the striking down should come into effect. And I'm not wild about that, but that's what we have to do. So we're likely going to be back into court at the end of May, making arguments about that. We'll be saying, of course, that this is a violation of the Constitution that's been found at this point. The law didn't even exist until a couple of years ago, so it's not like the government needs time to go recraft it and try to make it constitutional. It's time to just strike this down and let us get back into the field and resume undercover investigations. So that's number one. Number two is there's the possibility that the government will appeal this ruling. It would be surprising to me if they didn't. Typically, governments try to protect their own territory and, ensure that they can do as much as possible within the realm of violating people's rights. So it would be surprising to me if we didn't see some action on an appeal, but they have 30 days to file that notice.
And if they appeal, that it's considered for appeal, but it doesn't necessarily mean an appeal.
Oh, that's a good question. I don't recall now if they need to seek leave or not. I should know that, but I don't.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah. So we're just waiting. Like they've got 30 days after that end of May date that we're probably going to do.
No, they would have 30 days after April 2nd to file the notice of appeal.
Okay. So they've got 2 weeks basically.
Yeah. So we'll have information soon.
Okay. Okay. Got it. And so, yeah. So if there's an appeal, does that mean we have to start the whole thing all over again? Or we're not sure yet what that means.
Well, it means that we would go back into court before the Ontario Court of Appeal, which is considered the leading appellate court in Canada. So winning a case there is very influential for the rest of the country, which is important.
Yeah.
And it wouldn't be exactly starting the process over because at this point we've created the case and the record. So all the evidence that we've compiled, that still stands. And the judges at the next level in the Court of Appeal would be able to look at the case, the evidence that we've presented, and decide whether there were any legal errors or whether the judge that just decided our case got the law right.
Got it. Got it. Okay.
So typically, just to give people an idea of timeline, that process would take around a year.
And, I mean, it would be great to have the law struck down right away, but to also win at a higher level of court is even more powerful too.
Yes. Well, hopefully we'll get both. Hopefully the judge will strike down the law pretty quickly and we'll be able to resume investigations. And then we'll fight the appeal as it comes. They could seek a stay of the ruling pending an appeal. And we're not sure yet if they would plan to do that or if it would be granted, and we would certainly fight against it.
Okay. Amazing. And so, so I want to get some questions in here from other AJAers. So Jade is asking, and folks, if you do have a question, just to differentiate it from the rest of the chat, if you can do **Q and then the question, that would be great. I think we've already answered a lot of the questions that were asked. But Jade asks, does the repeal of the Ag-Gag law also protect independent activists that infiltrate the farm to expose cruelty to animals?
Well, I guess to answer that question, so it protects people who seek positions undercover on farms to expose cruelty, whether that be a journalist or a whistleblower who's potentially already in place. So it doesn't really matter if it's a group that sent somebody in undercover or if it's somebody who went and saw the job independently. If by independent, a question refers to somebody who just goes onto a farm, that, without permission, so i.e. trespassing, that part of the bill was not struck down. It is still unlawful to trespass on the farm, so don't do that. And that would not change.
Okay. And Sarah was asking if the decision has been posted somewhere, and Sarah, Kirsten will put in our animal justice blog that covers this, which also has a link to the decision, so you can read through it yourself. Okay, let's see here. We had another couple of really good questions. Tanabre is asking, is there a legal basis that within Canada where bearing witness can be banned? Is there any, like, you know, anything that we could do differently next time in our next province or anything, Camille? Or is that just a really tough one to get struck down?
Well, if this decision is appealed, we're having discussions at the moment. I can't say too much more because we are not too far into the conversation yet, but about a cross appeal. So we could appeal the provisions that we lost on about bearing witness. And I have some concerns about the judgment and the way that was crafted. The judge essentially said that because the bearing witness and the interaction with animals takes place involving private property, that there's no constitutional right to use private property for free expression. I don't think that analysis really hits the nail quite on the head. And so there may be a situation where we end up cross appealing that. Can't say too much more yet, but that'll be something to watch.
And Debbie was asking, how do these private farms that are given billions of taxpayer dollars in animal ag, how do they receive subsidies? Oh, I think she's asking in terms of the fact that they're considered private, but they're actually getting all this public subsidies. Is there any comment on that, about that, you know, the idea of that being private property but getting all of the public money?
Yeah, I mean, from a pure property perspective, it wouldn't really matter if it was like you got no right to trespass on anybody's property, whether it's privately owned or publicly owned. Even the government, which owns public property, which belongs to all of us, can still say you can't go into this park after 10 p.m., for instance, or you can't come into the tax department's building after 5 p.m. So that's sort of a separate issue. But I think the point, Debbie, that really is driven home by your question to me is just this idea that we are all paying for this industry to exist through our tax dollars. And the people who buy these products are funding it as well, because some of their money goes to the industry groups that lobby on behalf of them for Ag-Gag laws. So this is a system funded by all of us. It's a publicly funded system. It's essentially a welfare state for farmers. And it is truly a real mind twist to think that despite the fact that we're funding this industry, it is the least transparent one possible that you could imagine. We have absolutely no right to know what goes on. The industry makes up its own rules. It self-regulates. It's allowed to do that by the government. The government takes no hand in creating those standards. And the standards that do exist are not publicly enforceable by anybody because they're not laws. So industry says it polices itself, and says it does its own inspection. So this is a completely privatized system that relies on public funding. And frankly, it's unacceptable in 2024.
I would add too that they control their own messaging as well. So they also have this ability, not just with marketing and advertising, but we also have trade publications in the media space that cater to these people and these industries. And we see even in mainstream media that when we have an issue, say regarding an egg farm, for example, journalists have been trained to go and talk to the egg lobby group, in that case, to go talk to egg farmers as the experts in these stories, rather than talking to animal advocates who would have the voice and the care of the animal as their subject matter. So the fact that the industry is not only hidden behind walls, both literally and figuratively, and that they also are hidden behind their own regulations, they're also hiding behind their own messaging and marketing and own media. And so that just adds more fuel to the fire for why they need to be exposed and have transparency be brought to light.
On that topic, Christina's asking, is there a consumer agency in Ontario that is on the side of wanting to know the conditions of farms housing animals for food? Like, is there an actual or consumer organization around that?
No.
No. Yeah.
Easy answer. There are government folks in the consumer protection roles. To my knowledge, and maybe I'm wrong about this, but I'm not aware of them taking any interest in this issue. We found through really a decade at this point of consumer protection complaints with authorities that it's pretty rare that they would take action, even when customers are being blatantly misled by companies. I think the only time that we've seen real significant success is when McDonald's put up billboards advertising their quarter pounders as sustainable, with an asterisk that said that the quarter pounders could contain up to 30% certified sustainable beef, whatever the heck that means, who knows? And the Competition Bureau did reach out and they eventually removed the ads. They weren't prosecuted or anything, but there was an agreement that they should remove them. But I'm not, but yeah, there was no situation where, we've complained about humane washing, conditions that our animals are kept in on farms and how the industry markets that. And none of these agencies have ever taken action on that basis, despite pretty clear misleading advertising.
Excellent. Jay said, could we launch a consumer complaint process? Jay Scott, I assign you to get going on that. If anybody can do it, Jay can do it.
Yeah, go for it, Jay.
We have had success in Manitoba. I know that Debbie Wall was successful in getting an advertisement for, what was it, hot dogs, I think it was, at the ballpark, being advertised as healthy.
Yeah, baseball games.
That's right. Yeah. So I mean, there has been success, very minimal success of false advertising claims. It is an avenue to explore. It's an arduous one. So Debbie Wall for that.
Well, and so I know everybody's busy, and we've had 211 folks here at the height, and I know lots of you have to go. But one more question from Ken. Ken's asking, can this decision now help define liabilities to people for economic damages to animal farming operations caused in pursuit of activities deemed cruel, since there is no actual defined animal cruelty laws? Are you tracking on that, Camille?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure how to answer that. I would have to think about that a lot more.
Okay. Yeah, Ken's always throwing us some good questions.
Thanks for the question, Ken. Sorry.
Yeah. Okay. Last question from me. Who's next on the hit list? Can we say, Camille?
Well, yeah. We are working on a bunch of different fronts right now. Preliminary work in Alberta. Hopeful that it's possible Manitoba will actually repeal the Ag-Gag law through the legislature instead of having to challenge it. That's always a possibility.
That'd be amazing.
There's a new government in that province that was opposed to the Ag-Gag law when it was passed. So we'll see. And then, of course, continuing to fight the federal Ag-Gag bill, which is now in the Senate. And we will have more actions coming on that, likely in the next couple of months. It's going to be before the Agriculture Committee, but it hasn't really started moving quite yet.
Yeah, so we've got quite a journey ahead of us, folks. And I just want to remind everyone, you've been so generous in helping us with our court cases, but we're continuing to go on. So if you're inspired by this work and this form of standing up for animals, please consider donating to us. We'll put a link in the comments right now. Kirsten will put in a link to do any sort of donation. Again, any amount helps. This will go towards AJA and animal justice. So please consider that. And also, folks, keep your eye out for letters to the editor possibilities. Keep your eyes out for our collective actions. As long as you're on our Animal Justice Academy list, you're going to get those actions straight to your inbox. Make sure you're opening up those emails. Let's go back, take us off of Spotlight and go back to our gallery view. I think we are, so you can see everybody. Camille and Jess, just go make sure you're on your gallery view. Okay, AJAers, can we thank these two amazing individuals for all their work and being with us today? Thank you so much, Camille and Jessica. Thank you for not only today, thank you for your tireless work over so many years. Yes, yes, yes.
Can I just turn that back around and say thank
Please.
you to first you, Kimberly, and you second, Jessica and Kristen, for your role, and Karen, but also just to everybody who's here, because this was truly a group effort. This project that we had to undertake because of the circumstance foisted on our community was massive. And it took a lot of resources. It took a lot of time, not just internally at Animal Justice, but from funders and from supporters as well. And I think that all of that effort has paid off in a massive way, not just in the fact that we're back to where we started, because now we don't have some parts of this terrible Ag-Gag law, but because of what we've accomplished along the way collectively, which is shining the spotlight on the industry that hates the light of day. And that has power and value on its own. And I'm just really grateful to everyone that played a role in helping to do that. And I assure you, this is not the end of Ag-Gag laws in Canada. We will keep talking about what the industry doesn't want the public to know about.
Yeah.
Well said. Yes, thank you all so much.
Very amazing. And don't you forget, all of you folks, you have the flashlight, and all of these flashlights together, it's that huge spotlight that we're shining to expose what's happening for the animals. Okay. So everybody, thank you so much. We will see you in 2 weeks. For those of you who are signed up for Where's Cultivated Meat At, that is happening on May 2nd at 12 p.m. Eastern Time. Kirsten has put the link in the chat, and I hope you'll join us for that. And in the meantime, thank you so much, everybody. Camille, Jessica, have a great day, everybody. And let's keep fighting for animals. Bye-bye.
Bye.